Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's good to see faces. If folks are able to turn their cameras on, we'd love to see you. If you can't, we also understand. Welcome again. I'm Andy Engel, and I lead virtual public programs here at Reimagine. Welcome to the first of 3 sessions in the series Surviving a Sibling, a look at grief that's often overlooked. For those who may not know about Reimagine, I want to say that Reimagine is a nonprofit organization catalyzing a uniquely powerful community. People of different backgrounds, different ages, different races, different sexual orientations and gender identities, people of faith, people of no faith, all coming together to heal ourselves, our communities, and the world. We support each other in facing adversity, loss, and mortality, and we hope to transform life's biggest challenges into action and growth. Reimagine resources, support groups, events like this one today are free, sliding scale, and accessible to the public. This is made possible by the support and generosity of participants like you. So for those of you who already made a tax-deductible donation to Reimagine when you registered for this, thank you. Your gift will immediately support Reimagine's mission to help people of all walks of life transform the hard parts into purpose and meaning. Our theme this month is sibling loss. Our hope is to focus attention on the forgotten mourners, the brothers and sisters who don't get to fully express their grief when all the focus is on others. This is a space for them. It's equally a space for those who want to cultivate their grief literacy. So welcome to all of you. What ways can we all show up for individuals who are mourning a brother or sister? We kick off the series today with our Let's Learn session. Our speakers will have an opportunity to introduce themselves. I encourage you, though, to read their full bios on the event page that my colleague, Nicole Tan, is going to paste in the chat. There you can check out websites, podcasts, and their publications. We'll paste those as well. For now, I want to briefly thank our speakers, Moira Khan, Judy Lipson, Annie Sklaver Orenstein, and Dr. Julie Shaw. And my primary thought partner on this series is Nina Rodriguez. She's been one of my guides. Nina, thank you so much for being my partner and for facilitating this conversation. All 5 of our speakers are accomplished individuals. They all juggle many responsibilities, particularly the young mothers in our group, and they share multiple identities in this world. But today, of course, I want to honor them as surviving siblings. The sister of Alistair, the sister of Margie and Jane, the sister of Ben, the sister of Jennifer, and the sister of Joseph. Today is mostly about learning, listening, witnessing, and hearing stories from our speakers. Next week is going to be more participatory. You'll experience a movement workshop led by Eileen Kilty in order to embody and metabolize what you've learned today. And the following Wednesday, writers David Martinez and Nico Slate will reflect on growth and learning after the loss of their brothers and hopefully inspire you to take small, sweet steps towards growth. Our community of collaborators at Reimagine host events on our platform. You can too. We'll share a link in case you're interested in hosting your own events. Please check out all collaborator events on our schedule. For this month, we've been encouraging our collaborators to present programs related to this theme, sibling loss. On February 13th, Body Comes to Mind will host Connection Without Compromise with a focus on sibling loss. And on February 21st, Danny Sather hosts a workshop on best practices for adults to support children who are grappling with death, loss, and grief. Before we begin, some quick Zoom tips. For those who wish, click on the CC icon to get a live transcript of what's being said. If you'd like to see the recording of the full transcript, click on the CC icon and select the View Full Transcript option. And you can save and download the chat by clicking on the three dots within the chat box. Feel free to send me or Nicole a note if you're having any technical problems. We can try to help you. And I wanted to let everyone know that everyone who is registered will receive a follow-up email with the recording as well as information about all of our speakers. Okay. Today's conversation will be approximately 50 minutes. That will be followed by Q&A. So please start using that chat as you listen to our speakers and questions occur to you. Nina will collect those. So Nina, I'm going to hand this over to you now. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you, everybody, for being here. It's good to see your beautiful faces. And thank you, Reimagine, for creating the space for these important and intentional conversations and experiences together. My name is Nina Rodriguez. I am a grief guide, and I am host of the Grief and Light podcast and creator of Grief and Light, an online community and one-on-one grief support. And my work here started following the unfortunate passing of my brother, only sibling. His name is Joseph. Back in 2019, it was 9/11, not the 9/11 everybody knows, but the one that reshaped our life and my family's life. And similar to our amazing panelists today, our speakers who unfortunately share the reality of sibling loss. And at the same time, because grief is about duality, we get to have these conversations to create awareness and honor our loved ones. So I'm going to invite you before we start to a moment of mindfulness so that we can be fully present in our bodies and in the space and in what we're doing here today. So please close your eyes or lower your gaze, whatever is most comfortable to you. Unclench your jaw, relax your shoulders, roll them back. Breathe naturally. And when you can, take a deep breath and extend the exhale. So for example, in for 4 and out for 8. Let's do that together. And breathe normally as I set an intention for our time together. If it's helpful to you, please keep your eyes closed. We take this moment to pause and breathe, recognizing the sacredness of this shared space. Together, we honor the journey that has brought each of us here, the love we carry, the grief we bear, the memories that shape us, and the resilience that sustains us. I invite you to bring your siblings into your heart in whatever way feels right for you, perhaps by saying their name or typing it in the chat, by remembering a moment you shared, or simply holding their presence close. If it serves you, allow them to be here with us in the space of remembrance and connection. We set the intention to create a safe, open, and supportive space where no one's grief is too small or too much, where the often overlooked loss of sibling loss is seen, understood, and held with care. Let this be a moment where we release the weight of anything that prevents us from being fully present. May this time together offer comfort and connection, peace and presence, and strength in knowing that while our losses are uniquely our own, we do not walk this path alone. We bless this gathering with love, understanding, and the recognition that grief carries its own wisdom. Through these conversations and the act of witnessing one another, we learn to move forward with intention and grace. And so it is. Open your eyes whenever you're ready, and we'll get started. So as I get ready to introduce the speaker, I want to share a quote that a lot of grievers feel that is reflective of our sibling loss experience. And it's a quote you may have heard of: "The loss of a brother or sister is not small, unimportant, or invisible. In fact, it is quite the opposite. I call sibling loss the loss of a lifetime, because who else do we expect to have relationships with that stretch our entire lives. That's a quote by Lynn Shattuck. I think I'm saying her name right. And it's something that maybe I invite you to hold as we proceed with the conversations and as you hear the stories of Moira Khan, Judy, Annie, Sklaver Orenstein, Dr. Julie Shaw, and as they introduce themselves. So I'll invite each of you to introduce each other, starting with, introduce yourself, excuse me, starting with Moira Khan of Griefspan. And if you could just start by saying your name, your sibling's name, your current work in this grief space, and a reflection on what it means to be a forgotten mourner. Specifically, how has that been reflected in your life? And how has that shifted your sense of identity? And Moira, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Nina. And thank you to Reimagine for allowing this conversation today and for everyone that's here. My name is Moira Khan. I am actually in Madrid in Spain and originally from New Zealand. My brother, who was 47 when he passed away, his name is Alistair. And it was 2017 in December. So it's been a while, but it's not. It's forever. And the current work that I do in the grief space, I'm a certified grief educator and coach under the name of Griefspan, like Nina said, and I have a large community on Instagram, and I do a lot of work with one-on-ones, groups, and just general education about grief. My sense of identity. Alistair was my only brother, so I'm the surviving sibling of my family, and I've also lost my parents, so I am it as far as my immediate family goes. And my brother died just before my father died, and I had to tell my father that my brother died. And my identity will never be the same. I feel like I have made a huge shift in this world, and although I am now helping people and finding purpose by doing what I'm doing, it doesn't change the fact that I'm an orphan now as well. And that's, that's been hard to adapt. And so I feel like now it might be my time to share this with people like yourselves about my journey and how difficult it is and how, but it's nice to have had this chance now to actually have Alistair's legacy as well live on, because he was an amazing brother, and so I feel like his legacy is living through me and the work that I do, and that's how much of a shift it's been for me. So
thank you so
thanks,
much,
Nina.
Moira. We honor your lived reality as a bereaved sister, surviving sibling, and Alistair through these conversations. So thank you so much. Judy Lipson is the author of Celebration of Sisters. I actually have her book right here. It's an amazing book where she shares her story about losing both sisters. So whenever you're ready, Judy, please go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Hi, all. Thank you, Andy and Reimagine, for having such a wonderful program for siblings. And thank you, Nina, for moderating. And I'm honored to be here with Moira, Annie, and Julie and share all your stories. Thank you all for attending, for showing your self-compassion, and for all of us for sharing our siblings. I'm Judy. I'm the middle of three, and sadly, I lost my sisters. And it took me a very long time to say that. I lost my sister Jane in 1981 at age 22 in an automobile accident. And 9 years later, in 1990, I lost Margie at age 35 after a 20-year battle with anorexia and bulimia. So back then, there was no support, and I squashed the grief for 30 years because, as you know, as siblings, we're the forgotten mourners. So I took the time 30 years ago, after 30 years, to grieve for them and founded Celebration of Sisters, which is an annual ice skating fundraiser to honor them. So how has it changed me? It's who I am now, that I can honestly say that I've brought them back into my life, that and sharing my story is the way that I hope nobody has to go through that I went through the grieving alone. And I hope in sharing my story, speaking, and being on the board of a nonprofit, that no one should grieve alone. And that's the hope I can give to others.
Thank you so much, Judy. And that's something I want to highlight there, that there is no time for grief. You could grieve immediately, or let's say 30 years later, like in Judy's case. And next, Annie Sklaver Orenstein, author of Always a Sibling, which is an absolutely incredible book. Go ahead and introduce yourself whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Annie Sklaver Orenstein. My eldest brother, Ben, was killed in Afghanistan in 2009. And it, the question of how does my sense of identity shift, I would say it didn't shift so much as it shattered. I am the youngest of three, and being the youngest of three was very much my identity. My older siblings were my guideposts, my everything. And Ben, who died, was the eldest of us all. And I had never lived a day in my life without him. I didn't know a world without him. And the world, obviously in part because of his cause of death, but the world felt very, very scary for a long time after he died. Current work in the grief space is the book, Always a Sibling. I also have a 9-to-5 that has absolutely nothing to do with grief or anything, any of this. And so it's kind of an interesting code switching that often happens between, writing early in the morning and then spending 8 hours in meetings talking, about tech. And so it's nice to be in a space with other surviving siblings and other people who know what this is like.
Thank you so much, Annie. And, honoring that, this current work for so many of us is not anything we ever foresaw any of us doing. And yet here we are together. It's part of the reason that we are all here today. So thank you for the work that you do. And the amazing research that went into your book as well. It's very powerful for anybody who's had the chance to read it. And then last but not least, Dr. Julie Shaw of Hello, I'm Grieving, who's I was going to say celebrating, but we are honoring the 5th anniversary of her sister Jennifer's passing today. So thinking about her today. And go ahead and introduce yourself whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Dr. Julie Shaw. My pronouns are she, her. And today, and I didn't mind that word. I think sometimes the language that we use can be very intentional. It can also evoke different emotions. And I think now celebrating, I like it. I like honoring, I like celebrating because I do want to celebrate her. And I think this is a way that I can do that today and to be amongst others that understand. And I am the founder of Hello, I'm Grieving, which is a grief community. I am currently building out a community platform where educational resources can be housed, different courses, and then also just a meetup space for anybody. Exactly what we've been, this running theme is to not feel alone. And I think I also, and I don't know if you'll feel that today, I hope you feel it today. I think as I have learned with my grief and progress with my grief and how we talk about how we have shifted, I've always been a positive person and I never want it to come off as overly positive because I have been on this path navigating my own grief. I think it is because I am a former professional athlete that a lot of the mental training that I've gone through has guided me through this process as well, which is very interesting. And it has allowed me to navigate grief in a way that I have found myself encouraging myself, motivating myself, finding different ways to set goals within my grief, because I didn't want everything to die with my sister. And so grief has absolutely taught me to, and it's so cliche, but to live. And that's why I think even when I heard celebrate is like, how can we continue to celebrate not only their lives, but our lives? My sister's name is Jennifer. I think I've been reading all these names come through. I think there's power in that because I think that we often do not hear our siblings' names. We may have a hard time speaking our siblings' names, and and that can be another death in itself. And there's a quote out there, I'd posted about this the other day, where we experience our first death like with our body, but the second death is when somebody speaks our name for the final time. And so it's great to see all the names being spoken here. And I think that's also another source of connection because I'm sure when you see maybe you shared a sibling's name or a reference there that it sparks something in you. And the work that I do within the grief space is to create community. I'm all about healing in community. I believe that's how we heal and to have our grief witnessed and validated. And I also do work in the corporate space. So I also do grief education. I'm also a certified grief educator, where I help build more empathetic leaders, which I'm sure we all need as many of us are returning to work in many different capacities, and being able to aid people returning to work, but also to have employees and leaders be more educated on how to support grieving employees. And then I host different events and collaborate with other folks in the grief space, to, again, create community and build it. And then I also really am intentional about making it an inclusive space. So thank you. I saw in the comments about using the word sibling as well. So thank you for putting that in there, because I really do want to create an inclusive space for grievers because we are all so diverse in our grief. Last but not least, I also wanted to mention sometimes it may not be the death of a sibling. It can also be the distancing, whether it could be a mental health issue, it could be a fractured relationship, and that there are other ways that we could be grieving a sibling as well, other than death.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shaw. And I could resonate with something that each of you said about how nuanced this experience can be, and just sibling loss in general. I want to acknowledge in the comments somebody said that there's also nuance when you're a triplet or a twin. So just even the nature of your siblinghood or siblingship also impacts the type of grief you experience. And I just want to acknowledge that. So as a follow-up question, what are some misconceptions about losing a sibling that you've experienced? So whoever feels called to answer, go ahead. Otherwise, we can go in the order of Moira, Judy, Annie, and Julie. But the question was, what are some misconceptions that people have about losing a sibling?
I think if I was to answer that honestly, a lot of people seem to answer it with how close were you? And, I think a lot of people said to me, well, their first reaction was, how close were you to Alistair? We were 7 years apart, but that didn't mean that we were, distant. We were brother and sister, regardless. And there is no one that loves you like your sibling, because your sibling has been with you for most of your life, and it's a very unique relationship in so many ways. And we can't forget that. My brother knows things about me that my parents didn't know, and my friends didn't know. He knew all of the things that I got up to that I shouldn't have been doing, and all the secrets and all the, things that we hid from mum and dad and all of those fun things. But it's a relationship that we can't replace. And I think it's just a lack of education, I think, obviously, on people that don't know how to respond to our sibling loss. But it's just my opinion that a lot of people just seem to think that it's just, oh, well, you've just lost a sibling, and that's, But I feel like it is such a relationship that you can't ever replace and you cannot get back. And yeah, so that's just my thoughts.
I echo Moira's thoughts, and it's also the validation of the importance of the relationship, and it doesn't hold in esteem of some other losses. And I remember vividly when my second sister lost, and we were at the house sitting Shiva, a house full of people. I was upstairs alone. Nobody even noticed that I was gone. And I think that siblings, and look, at some sibling relationships are complicated. We know that. Siblings, you know, I was one of three sisters. That's my identity, the middle of three sisters. That's who I always am. We used to fight like cats and dogs, but then we'd love each other the next minute. And even one of my sisters was, you know, had mental illness for 20 years, but we were still close. And you know, sibling relationships can be complicated, they can be challenging, but there's a love there, and you know each other better than anybody else, and people don't understand that. I just wanted to just mention something prior. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, is what
Judy, I feel like we lost you there. Julie, I don't know, Judy, I don't know if you could hear us, but we lost you there. While we get her back, Annie, do you want to chime in?
Yeah. So when I was writing the book, Always a Sibling, I did a lot of research, and some of it was desk research, but a lot of it was interviews. And I surveyed like 350 surviving siblings, and then did follow-up interviews with over 40 of them, including Julie, actually, before we really knew each other. And, you know, I will say that even as someone who had lost a sibling at that point, doing those interviews made me realize how many misconceptions I had and still had about sibling loss. I was very, very close with my sibling. And one of the things that kind of surprised me, and shouldn't have surprised me, but did, was the number of people who said, you know, I did not have a good relationship with my sibling. We would not have been friends if we weren't related. And yet losing them is the worst thing that has ever happened to me. And it, you know, completely destroyed me. And some of those were people that I really wanted, you know, I made sure to interview and to talk to more, because it was like, help me understand, you know, you weren't, in the same breath, you're saying you wouldn't be friends if you weren't related. And yet it's the worst thing that ever happened to me. And I think what I really learned is that there's so much there. And oftentimes the more complicated the relationship, the more there is to grieve, and the more complicated that grief becomes, because you also have people, you know, external people saying like, well, I thought you guys weren't close. I thought you didn't get along, as if you are now not allowed to grieve. And I think the other thing, you know, that came through as well with different causes of death. I know I saw some people talking about it in the chat, and people who said, you know, I knew they struggled with drugs, or they had tried to take their life in the past, and yet when it happened, I was shocked. You know, like there's just, you can't rationalize it. You can't, it doesn't work that way. You know, siblings never known. Maybe you never even met them and they died before you were born, but then you are raised in the shadow of, you know, of a deceased sibling. You are raised by parents who are grieving the loss of a child. Like, how could that not impact you? And so I think, you know, there were a lot of misconceptions that even I had, and having those conversations and doing that work really helped me understand that sibling relationships are so deep and they are so strong that all of that other stuff on the surface, getting along or not, or whatever, kind of doesn't matter at the end of the day. The grief is felt so heavily, you know, by everyone. And yeah, that it kind of became my thing of like, everyone has to be able to grieve, because it often feels like siblings don't really have permission to grieve, especially if they have those difficult relationships.
Julie, if you want to go ahead and chime in.
I mean, I think everything resonates with me. And I think when you had mentioned earlier the Forgotten Mourners, it's one of those things I think even as society, as we look at different loss, especially in family structures, there can be maybe even like a ranking, right? Like if you are a child that has lost their parent, or if you are a parent that has lost their child. And it's like when we talk about that in between, when you are that sibling, oftentimes I feel like it could be a misconception that that we don't get checked on as much, or that people somehow think it's an easier loss. And so I think those are some of the misconceptions that may come about, or that people don't necessarily just recognize it. Because if you lose your parent, right? I think people are like, oh man, like you lost your parent. And if you lost both parents, and vice versa. And I kind of think it's the same way that people will say, oh, well, if your grandparent died, sometimes we lessen that too. We don't give too much credence to that. So I think siblings are kind of lost in that shuffle, in that mix as well, um, depending on those typical familial ties, if that makes sense, there as well. And I think you also can tie in even cultural aspects to this. Is how are people tending to siblings, and even in mourning traditions that people have and rituals that people have when it comes to siblings as well.
Thank you. Judy, we have you back here. We
Yeah,
didn't get
my apologies, technical difficulties.
it happens, but I don't know if you wanted to finish the thought that you had before the call dropped, or if you would like us to continue.
Why don't we go on? It's fine.
Okay.
I'll circle back to it later. Keep going.
Thank you all for presenting these different aspects. I'm noticing in the chat a lot of, head nods. Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of agreements, and a lot of thanking you for acknowledging those relationships that perhaps were non-existent, strained, not your typical, like we had a great sibling bond and yet we still grieve that. So that's something that is important to acknowledge. And part of the reason why sibling loss in particular has so many different aspects that differ from traditional losses. So I'd like to ask more individual questions now for your specific type of losses. I'll start with Moira. You recently shared on your social media account about the shadowed milestone. So could you talk about what that is and how you experienced that very recently when you turned the same age that your brother Alistair was when he passed?
Thanks, Nina.
Mhm.
This is something I mean, I wouldn't have known about until I lost my brother, and it's only something I've recently been able to familiarize myself with in the last couple of years since training and certifying. And shadowed milestone is basically those highlighting the gap between once that was and what is now. So basically, just to give you an example, Alistair was 47 when he died. As I said before, there was a 7-year age gap between us. And 2 weeks ago, I turned 47. And so I had that it's like an anticipatory grief. So basically, you've got 7 years I've been waiting and having this in the back of my head, thinking, is it going to be my time? What will happen when I turn 47? All of the things that play on your mind. And then when the day actually came, I can't explain it, but it was um, a, my birthday was the non-event that I really didn't want to be in. I just couldn't get my head out of it. I wanted the day to be over faster than the night started. I just couldn't be in it. And I feel a little bit better now, but it doesn't mean that it's gone, because he didn't die until he was 47 and a half. And still, so I'm still faced with this anticipation, but it's basically, where that weight of the grief can overshadow any celebration that we have, or the normalcy of that we might expect on those days, like the days of their death or their birthdays and things like that. So it's a very complex emotion that we can go through with this shadowed milestone, and it is pretty much what it says. And so everything is overshadowed by this particular date or this, event of what you're anticipating. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely. And Dr. Shaw, you had a similar experience in that you already passed it. Would you like to chime in on that end?
I did. I'm a big head nodder. So when I hear something and it hits, but absolutely. I mean, not only today, I would say with it being the 5th year anniversary of my sister's death, my sister was 44 when she died. And last year I turned 44, and this year in January I turned 45. So now this is the year so Moira, you're gonna probably go through this. This is the year now that I actually exceed her lifespan. And so that's also a completely different feeling as well. And how it shows up for me is it shows up when I look at her pictures now. I don't know if anybody here had issues looking at pictures of their sibling. I know that was very early on in like the first year of my grief. I feel like I could not look at pictures as I do now. Now it's changed where I love looking at pictures and I like the emotions that it invokes. I'm happy to cry looking at pictures. I feel like sometimes the grief in a way brings me closer to her. And that can sound odd to some people, but it makes sense to me. And yeah, that milestone, because now I'm officially in, she is now stuck at that age forever. And I continue on. And what does that look like? And will I still be able to see me in her or imagine her growing older?
Thank you. And Judy or Annie, would you like to chime in as well on that, or based on your experience?
Yeah, well, I'm 68, so I've long lived out my sisters, but I hear you because I remember holding my breath till I turned 35, that I had outlived my sisters. And like Julie said, the year after was kind of like, oh, wow, I've outlived them. And my birthday was the last time I saw my sister Jane. So for years, my birthday always had that shadow, the cloud. And it wasn't until I met one of her friends and said, that's not what she would have wanted. But there's still always that piece. So I think it comes and goes. So thank you for sharing, because I think it resonates with a lot of us.
Can I add something onto that? That last piece of that's not what she would have wanted. My mom said that to me the other day when I called and was just like, I'm just really sad. Because my sister's birthday and her anniversary, which is her death anniversary, is exactly 1 week apart. So when she said that, it was kind of the way that I looked at it is like, I get that. However, for my sister and ours relationship, I think she would understand if I was sad. And so it's like sometimes it's like, yeah, they don't want you to be sad. I would also offer to let it be okay that you are, and to say they would understand depending on your relationship, because I'm also reading all these things coming through the chat depending on your relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And Annie, I want to go to you. In your book, Always a Sibling, along this thread of thought here, you highlight the importance of validating our own grief as bereaved siblings, something that is often dismissed and minimized. So not only does it come externally, but also within ourselves, we don't validate our own grief. So how can siblings learn to give themselves the validation that we may not receive from others? And what are some ways we can advocate for ourselves?
Yeah. I think an exercise that I find really helpful is to talk to myself as if I am talking to a friend or a younger version of myself, or I often imagine like I'm talking to my daughter. And because sometimes I find that like if I say it out loud and I imagine, what if someone said that to me? What if my best friend came to me and said, I'm really upset because this week is my, and Julie, my brother's the anniversary and birthday are 3 weeks apart, right? So all of October is shot. Like October is now, you know, February used to be my least favorite month. Now it's October. And I imagine, all right, what if a friend came to me and said, I'm having a really hard time because this month it's the anniversary of my sibling's death. It's also my sibling's birthday, and I am now older than them, and, you know, all of these things. If someone came to me and said that, I would be like, of course you're not okay. Why, in what world would you be okay? Right? Like, how can we take care of you? How can you take care of yourself? And I think that it becomes so clear to me when I say it out loud, or I imagine someone else saying it to me. And I often think, like, why am I so mean to myself? Like, I'm so much meaner to myself than I am to anyone else. Like, I say things to myself that I wouldn't even say to people I genuinely dislike. Right. And so, like, what am I doing? And I think that has been a really important mind shift for me, because I was really hard on myself for a really long time, you know, and I didn't want to be the girl with the dead sibling, or what, you know, I didn't want to talk about it too much. I didn't want to be too sad or too this, or maybe I'm, you know, being over dramatic because I don't want to go see a movie where there's a war scene, right? But when I shift it and I imagine, what if my, you know, what if a younger me came to me with this, or someone who I'm friends with came to me with this, I would be like, yeah, don't go see a war movie, right? Go see something else. And I think, I do think in a way, it's kind of how I channel Ben a little bit. You know, I remember this moment, before he was deployed, where I'd gotten a New York Times alert about deaths in Afghanistan. And at the time, he was supposed to be going to Iraq. And I messaged him and I was really freaking out. And he was like, are you a masochist? Like, turn off New York Times alerts. What are you doing? Don't do this to yourself. And I think for a really long time, he was that person. I didn't have to be nice to myself, because I would just talk to him and he would be nice to me, and I could reflect that back on me. And it took me maybe a decade to learn how to talk to myself with the kind of love and compassion and acceptance that he used to talk to me, you know. But since I've been able to do that, I've given myself a lot more grace. And I think that it makes it a lot easier for me to validate my own feelings, and in turn, it kind of diminishes anyone else's opinions, because I now feel validated in my own feelings. And so if someone else doesn't, like, that doesn't matter to me. Has become much less of a concern.
Thank you for that. I think it's important for us to validate it ourselves, and that way we help others validate their own grief as well. And that's an important step, to be so kind to ourselves. Like you said, we could be so harsh. We could be our harshest critics. I want to be mindful of time, so I'm going to ask one more question for Judy, and then I want to move forward to a topic about post-traumatic growth. And we'll then take some questions. I'm noticing in the chat so many people resonating with each other's experiences, and that's absolutely beautiful. I encourage you to submit your questions. We'll be on the lookout for them. And, you know, once we finish our panel discussion, we can go ahead and address those. So for Judy, you lost both of your sisters, first Jane and then Margie. And in your book, Celebration of Sisters, you mentioned that after Jane's passing, you and Margie never spoke about it. It was different times, it was a different context, and the understanding about grief was a little bit different back then. So as you reflect on how your grief for both of them has surfaced more fully after your father's passing, and which happened decades later, can you share more about that delayed grief process and how it shaped your understanding of loss?
Wow, that's a good question, and a lot of layers to that. Well, Margie and I think, didn't talk about the grief. It was 1981, and also Margie's illness went on a decline, and we were in different states. So I think that's probably part of it. And as we all know, grief has no timeline, and everybody's journey is their own. And I think that I learned that everybody grieves in their own way, in their own time, when it's good for them. And you can't compare yourself to anybody else's grief. Somebody might, need to go to a support group, somebody may not. And you have to respect everybody else's. For me, waiting the 30 years, I had to forgive myself that I waited 30 years. And that took a lot of therapy. And why did I wait so long, and all the years? And the hardest part was the memories that I had lost. And what I did learn is I had to learn to forgive myself, and saying I did the best I could at the time. And in writing became a wonderful tool for me, in keeping a journal and I learned a lot about myself and through the grieving process. And it's the hardest thing was when my daughter said to me, grief is defining you. And that hurt me to the core. Listen, we've all lost people. This is part of our life, but it doesn't define me. It's part of me. It's who I am. But once I brought my sisters back into my life, my parents didn't talk about them because it was too painful for them. So as a result, I didn't, and I feared, and I did lose a lot of the memories. So you had talked about looking at the pictures. Initially, when they died, I scrambled to make collages, and then I didn't look at them. But then to try to get the memories back, I looked at the pictures. So it's a part of me, and now I like talking about them and sharing with them. I have a daughter named for one sister. I have a granddaughter named for the other. And the biggest thing that I've learned is that if we didn't love so much, we wouldn't grieve so hard. And the same with the birth of my 3 grandchildren under 5, that the joy, there's love. And the common denominator is the love, and merging the grief and the joy, and the common denominator is the love. So I guess that's kind of the big answer to that.
Thank you for that. It is a big question that's hard to answer in a short amount of time.
Right.
The answer is
I gave you the cliff notes.
Thank you. The answer is the love. The love is the answer. It's what
Yes.
we still share. I love that. And on that topic of how we get to love them now, I heard somebody say, I interviewed somebody that said, this is how we get to carry their love light forward. And I love that phrase. I've been borrowing it since. So beautiful. And for me, it's in the way that, we do these panels and how we talk about them. But I want to introduce our audience today to a concept called post-traumatic growth, if you haven't heard of it. And trauma and grief are not the same thing, but they have areas where they overlap and they can kind of coexist. And in a way that there's post-traumatic growth does not mean, to give it some context, it doesn't mean that your person died for a reason. We do not, at least I don't abide by the phrase, everything happens for a reason. No, thank you. Their loss did not happen for a reason. So please, the words that we are expressing with the concept of post-traumatic growth is not to say it justifies your loss. I want to be very clear about that. It's more, how do we answer the question, what now? What do we get to do with our life now? How do we get to love them now? How do we get to move forward now? And what meaning we give our lives after their passing can define a lot of how we develop and how we practice post-traumatic growth. So this is an open-ended question for whoever wants to answer. How have you found a new purpose? I would say it's safe to say yes, we're all here, but how has your perspective changed, or your insights have changed since your siblings passing? So what do you know now that maybe you wouldn't have known prior to their passing? How has your life changed, and how have you experienced post-traumatic growth in your life and maybe even your career? Whoever wants to chime in, maybe Moira, we could go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, I think for me, my relationship with my brother is probably more of an understanding one now. And I actually feel closer to him. I've taken a lot of time, therapy, reflection, and all sorts to get through the last 6 years. But the one thing I do know is that, my relationship with him, with Alistair, is so much more defined now and closer probably than ever, which might sound a bit strange, but given the way that he died, and for those of you who don't know, he died of a massive coronary. It was all very sudden, so I never got to say goodbye. And I wasn't able to fly back to New Zealand to say goodbye either. So I didn't get the chance to say those final words or do whatever it was. And I actually had a few regrets when my brother passed away as well, as to how he struggled so much during his life. My brother had severe depression. He was bipolar. He had a lot of illnesses. His relationship with my parents towards the end, especially my mother, was a little bit taut. And so I've taken a lot of time to understand his relationship with me and also with my parents. And I'm good with it now. I'm good with what happened before he passed away. I've come to a little bit of peace as well, and just basically closed a lot of chapters, but opened some really nice new ones. All the memories. And the more that I talk about him now, I share a lot about my family and my brother in particular, on my page and in my community. And the more I share about him, the more memories that come back. And so that's why I always say to people, the more you talk about it, the more you share their story, the more things start coming back. There are things in my memory that have come back about my brother that I thought didn't exist anymore. I thought they were gone. And so I think it's just such an important fact to be able to share that. And yeah, so that's something that really resonated with me.
I can jump in. I've been trying to take all these notes because I know everything people have been putting in the chat, everything people have been saying. We could go on for 10 hours. But I think with post-traumatic growth, it taps into people's grit and resiliency, and how we can bounce back from something that can be traumatic, can be the worst pain that we've felt before. All of these things, I do not want to negate that. I think, speaking on my behalf of what post-traumatic growth I have gone through, is I absolutely think that it has given me perspective. It has given me a bigger sense of authenticity and leaning into authenticity a lot more. I know that my grief connections and my grief friendships are the most authentic relationships that I have, because if you can go to somebody and say, hey, yeah, like my sister died, my sibling died, and speak their name and somebody gets that right away, what other barriers do you have? Like, if you can talk about death straight up, like, we've gotten to the tough stuff that we can talk about, and you can connect on a deeper level. If you've ever seen the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, that is my visual representation of grief. When the actress is going through all those different frames and changing, to me, that visual representation is me being cracked open in all the emotions in the universe that I've ever experienced. And I feel like that's what grief has done. So to me, grief has expanded my mind in a very deep way. And I'm a big believer in asking the universe for things. And sometimes I was like, this is my fault. Not like guilt, like my sister's death is my fault, but that, like, I did ask to be the highest version of myself. And for me to be that highest version of myself is to allow these different emotions to flow through me and to seek that understanding and what that is. So I also I am half Filipino, and my dad is Black, Southern military. And so it's like I come from these cultures that don't talk about their emotions, that don't show their emotions, that it's very infrequent if we say I love you. And so these are things that even my sibling and I dealt with, but we had each other for that. And so this is something I've had to grow and to learn. And I think Judy might have been talking about like how we don't talk about them anymore, or how we're bringing them up. I think that has been a struggle. This 5th year anniversary was sweet to me because my mom, it was the first time she put in our family chat, "I miss her." It was the first time that my mom ever like brought it up. And I think sometimes with familiar relationships, it's hard to like bring that up. And I saw in the chat, like nobody wants to talk about them. And so that was a really sweet moment for me. But I think this growth really is in leaning into life more. And death is our greatest teacher in that. And so, how can I lean into life? And my journey has been trying all the experiences that I can try and open to all of it. Because if I can be open to that, then I can find something that works for me in my grief, and not shut down. Because when my sister died, I immediately knew, I did not want to get stuck. And so that was my choice. I did not want to get stuck. I could take pauses, I could rest, I can ponder, I could do all that, but I really wanted to keep moving. And so I think that's where my post-traumatic growth is just being willing to experience my grief. Because if you're willing to dip your toe in it and open the door to that, there can be some really, really amazing things that you can see. Sometimes it's not that amazing, but you can shut the door on that and try something else. So
I
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just gonna kind of build off of one of the things that Julie said early on around perspective. I kind of think about it like my superpower. And like I don't know, I guess I have like maybe a sick sense of humor, but like, you know, the way that like a superhero origin story, like something tragic happens and then they get their power. And I feel like my brother died and I got this perspective. And it has, there are moments where I feel it with such clarity. And I'll give an example. I worked at Twitter when everything was imploding at Twitter, right? And Elon Musk was going to take over and no one knew what was going to happen. And everyone on my team, everyone was in a panic. And I just felt so calm the whole time. I felt this very to my core sense of calm, like there are worse things that could happen. The worst outcome here is I will lose my job and I will find another job. Right. And I remember even joking to my husband, like, as long as Elon Musk doesn't come here and kill my family, I'm fine. Like, this is not a big deal. Right. And I think it gave me this perspective of what matters and what doesn't matter and what can be replaced or fixed or done away with, and what are the things that matter most in this world, you know? And I think coming out of it and with that perspective, I have maybe an easier time with work-life balance in some ways, right? But when it came to writing the book, no, like I had no balance. But I think that there are, you know, when it comes to my surviving brother and my relationship with him and his kids, and, you know, we both feel this loss of like, there's supposed to be a third set of grandkids, of cousins, right? And they're not here. So we have to bring our kids together more and have this relationship. And I think that the perspective it has given me allows me to channel my energy into things that matter and things that, as I say to my kids, things that fill my bucket and fill me up. And I am able to care a little bit less about the other things. And I think that that growth for me, and also when I think about kind of where I was before he died versus now, you know, it's a big difference. And I think that it has allowed me to be more present in my life and more appreciative for my life, and really focused on things and experiences and people that matter.
I think it's one of those, it's like the Spider-Man quote, like with great power becomes great
Yeah.
responsibility. And so I think like, and I love it, like I resonate with all that, like to where if this is your superpower, what will you do with it?
Mhm.
And how can you lean into that? Because it is exactly the hero's journey
Mhm.
on what you described. Yeah. So how do you flex that superpower?
I'll just say quickly, for me, it was letting the walls down. I think initially I had so many walls up to kind of protect myself and taking care of my parents, that allowing myself to feel the emotions of the grief and understanding what grief was, letting my sisters sort of back into my life, because that's who I truly am, the middle of three sisters. And it's also the ice skating is because of sport that we shared, and the fundraiser that I do, that when I'm on the ice, I sort of feel them with me. And I mean, I never dreamed in my life that at 65, I'd write a memoir, that I'd be performing on the ice or speaking or even be with all of you today. I mean, I never dreamed of my wildest dreams at, 68. Here I am today. So thank you all. I really am grateful to all of you.
Thank you all for those beautiful answers. And I've been seeing so many people resonating with everything you're saying in the chat. We are kind of getting to the end here, and I do want to honor some of the questions that have been presented and want to give some space for them to be explored. For the sake of time, I'm going to clump a few of them together by theme because they seem to have some common elements. So on the topic of who am I after they're gone? Like my identity shifts. Who am I? So somebody asked, Star Robinson asked, for me, there was also an identity shift. I only had one sibling. Am I still a sister? There's minimal cultural support for losing this identity and role. That's a great question. And let me do these two because they're along the same line. So Debbie asks, how do I answer how many siblings do I have? What is the answer? I have 4 brothers, but only 2 are still living. I don't know how to answer that. And then Julie asks, how do you manage survivor's guilt and other guilt you may be feeling? So on the topic of who am I now that they're gone, how do I answer how many siblings do I have? And how do you honor your feelings of guilt, or how do you process your feelings of guilt? And I do want to chime in on a personal note for the who am I now that they're gone, if you've lost your only sibling or all of your siblings. I remember when I went back to work, somebody asked me, or somebody said in conversation, well, now that you're an only child, what are you going to, and then whatever she said after that, the words just faded into the background. I have no idea what she just said after that. It was a punch to the gut. It made me think of myself as something I had never thought of myself as, which is an only child, because who I am has been in relationship to my brother. And we were very close for, and even if we weren't, for all the reasons that we've heard in this panel, still, I've always thought of myself as a sister. It was and is an honor and a privilege to be his sister. So for perspective, that's something that everybody learns to answer on their own. But I would like to hear from our panelists about identity shifts, answering the question, how many siblings do you have? And what if there's guilt tied to that? Whoever wants to chime in, go ahead.
That's probably the hardest question we're ever asked, is how many siblings do you have? And I'm many years out. And I remember after my sister Jane died, well, how do I answer that? Am I the youngest now? Because I was the middle and she was the youngest. Or when after Margie died and I'm an only child. And I would just say it's just me. And it bothered me because that's really not the truth. To me, my identity was I'm the middle of 3 sisters. Even though they're gone, I'm still always Judy, the middle of 3 sisters. But it's a very personal decision on how you want to answer it. And how you answer it today may change how you answer it tomorrow or next year or the year after. And, if I'd go on a date with a guy, well, what do I say? And is it a test? Because if he doesn't, if I say it's just me, am I lying? Or if I want to go out with him again, should I tell him the truth? And that's sort of a test about how it answers the question. So it's a very, very challenging question. It's a very, very personal question. And I think that it depends on how you want to answer it and what you're comfortable answering it. And it might change as the years go on. And that would be my advice for somebody who's, I used to not answer it or change the subject, or I just never felt comfortable. But today, as of right now, this is how I answer it. I'm Judy, the middle of three, and sadly, I lost both my sisters.
Yeah, I have tried out a bunch of answers, like see what feels good. And there was one, I remember at one point I said, I have one brother, and I cried for like the rest of the day. I felt like I was denying Ben's existence and I couldn't deal with it. And so I say I have two brothers, and I normally just say, I have two siblings. And if there are follow-up questions, maybe I start with Sam and my surviving brother, and maybe we never get to the fact that one of them died. And, sometimes I might say I have two and one of them died, but normally I say I have two, because in my mind, I keep Ben very much in the present, and I like to think of him as my brother. He is my, I have two. And I have also learned, though, that you don't owe anyone your story, and you don't owe anyone an explanation. So if you're in a situation where you don't want this person to know, or you don't want to talk about it, maybe it's going to really derail you, and you don't want to, then say whatever makes it easiest for you in that moment. And, you can answer differently another time, but I think it's really on you to answer in a way that makes you feel best.
I was asked this question recently, and reflecting on it now, I've always said that I have a sister. I mean, I have three other brothers too, but and I've always said, all my siblings. I will add the caveat, she died. And I think I'm like, she died in 2020. Like I'm very specific, like when I tell them. But I've always gone with the honesty. And I think what you all have even described too, and even in the chat, is like you kind of get that feeling. And I think somebody also reiterated what Annie just said, is do what feels right for you. And I think somebody put like that's a form of self-care. So that's a form of self-care, and like you don't have the capacity, which I think I saw in the chat as well. If you don't have the capacity to deal with that in that moment, then that's your choice. And do what feels right. But I'll lean on Annie's title, always a sibling. So it's always gonna be the case in there too. Can I answer the guilt question?
Please.
With guilt, this is something, there's a lot of things that get caught up in guilt, but I was told, be a detective with your guilt. Is, are the facts really true? Because I think what can happen is sometimes, and maybe like me, all the times, we can spiral with guilt, and we can start to make up things in our minds, and our minds, our brains are very powerful things, that it can register things as real. And that's where our fear or our fight and flight response also activate in that moment. So when we are feeling this guilt, to really understand, are these things that I'm guilty about like really, really true? And then also is asking yourself question, like, how is your guilt serving you? Because what is that guilt doing for you? And to be able, because I can just be like, just let it go. No, it's not that easy. But I think it is something that we have to dig underneath, and being able to interview ourselves, be that detective, get curious about our guilt, so that we can peel back what is it really, and the root of that, so we can start peeling away and getting to that place where we can soften it or to forgive ourselves. because oftentimes we don't have that other person to get the facts from. So we will then make them up on our own. So an example of this is Super Bowl just happened. I just posted about this story, but I chose the year that my sister died. I chose to go. I'm a big Kansas City Chiefs fan. It did not turn out the way I wanted this year, but I chose to go to Kansas City to celebrate. And my wife's from there. So we went, but I left knowing I would miss my sister's birthday, which ended up being her last birthday. And then the next week she would die. So I sacrificed going to this trip versus spending the last few days with my sister. I didn't know she was going to die. That's also the thing, right? And I talked to her. She knew I was a big fan, and she was like, go live your life, go do stuff. And I had been caretaking with her. And I think caretakers experience this, is they don't allow themselves that joy as they are grieving. And so sometimes we can have guilt over that, guilt over experiencing the joys and the other beautiful emotions and experiences that we want to experience. Whereas we have to understand that they can coexist together. And so those can be other ways that we can, again, lessen and get to the point where we can free ourselves of that guilt, is really understanding the truth, and even understanding maybe whatever it is, because again, I don't know everybody's individual story, but maybe you were only doing what you could do to survive in that moment. And that's the truth of it. So that's what I'm going to say about that.
Moira, would you like to chime in on that one, or whoever didn't go, whoever would like to chime in, go ahead.
Yeah, mine's more about the guilt as well. I think I did for a long time. I had a lot of guilt, but I think more surrounding, like I said before, my brother passed away quite quickly, and relationships that we had, and the way that I potentially just shut out my grief as well after my brother died, because it was only a couple of years or 3 years after my mum had died. And I had also just had babies each time someone had died. My mum died when I was 6 weeks pregnant. My brother died at 5 weeks postpartum. And so I felt like I had this guilt that I didn't grieve at all because I was trying to be a mum. And the whole, the emotions that come with all of that on its own, never mind having just lost my mum and my brother at the same, so close after having babies, that there is so much emotion involved in that. And I blamed myself for a long time, thinking, I didn't grieve my brother properly because of that. But I had to let it go at some point, because it was just eating me up. And on the flip side of that also, I wondered, was I being a good mum? Because I thought I was grieving the right way, but I don't think I was. And so there's all these kind of mixed things that you feel. And it's like what Julie was saying before about your brain believing certain things, and that you have to really break it down and investigate, and it's true. It is absolutely true. You have to reframe things and actually think, oh, well, maybe it might have been this way, or maybe I would have done it differently, or, but some of that comes with time. A lot of that comes with time. And, as time goes on and events that happen throughout your life and the growth, here we go again with the growth, but, it just changes, and your thought process does start to change. But until you get to that point, the guilt doesn't have to stay, though. That's all I really want to express, is that the guilt doesn't need to stay. It's a really heavy thing to carry. And it's something that, will eat us up if we don't let it go or resolve it or find a way to channel it.
Thank you all. So we're at exactly the 5:15 mark as we speak. We honor your time if you have to leave, but we are going to go ahead and extend this just a little bit, because as you can see, there's so much about sibling loss to touch on. So only a few more minutes, but if you do have to leave, we respect your time, and you will get a replay of this if you've registered. And for those of us who can stay, well, we'll just extend it a few more minutes. I would like to thank all of our panelists. Thank you for your time, your openness. Sibling loss, as you can see, is a layered topic that deserves so much, I believe, deserves so much of this attention and time to be explored more fully. As a final touch point on this topic, I would like to present the concept of continuing bonds, which is death ends a life, but not a relationship. And I would like for us to explore that a little bit in a brief amount of time that we have. How do you practice continuing bonds? How have you practiced continuing bonds? If you do, what does that look like in your life? How do you keep being Alistair, Margie, and Jane's, Ben's, and Jennifer's sister in the context of loss? Whoever would like to chime in, go ahead.
I think, and this just particularly relates to my personal situation because I have kids, and my brother was always a very big, protector. And I always, describe him as that. There are so many scenarios and stories that I can remember that, I can describe him as being a protector, where he would look out for me or, do things for me and all those sorts of things. And with my children, I like to think I'm imparting similar things between them, and they know about Alistair so much. I share so much with them about their uncle. My eldest Lara was able to meet him, but she was only a little baby, so they will never know him, but they know him through me. And so I want to think that my little sister role is almost becoming a big sister role now, in the sense that I'm imparting a little bit of, or a lot maybe, of his personality, of the things that he used to do for me as a sister. And whether it sticks or not, I don't know. I'll have to wait a few years to find out. But I see a lot of my brother in my daughter in particular. A lot of the personality giving, the emotional side, they all love soft toys as well. My brother was a big soft toy boy. And I have to mention this because this is the last thing that my brother gave me. So if anybody thinks I like big cups of coffee, I do, but this is the reason why I drink out of this, is because it's the last thing my brother bought me from the M&M world. And that was just him. He was just a big kid. And so my kids, I see a little bit of my brother in my kids. They're big into soft toys. They're big into things that, I loved about my brother. And so I think that's just, yeah, I just wanted to share that.
I relate to the kind of talking about him a lot with kids. I certainly talk about my brother a lot with my kids and kind of tell them funny stories, and we kind of look for signs. And one thing that was really amazing actually before my book even came out, but in the lead up to it, it includes some excerpts from my brother's diaries. And when I got the early arcs, I mailed one to my surviving brother, and my 15-year-old nephew intercepted the mail and read the book first. And I didn't expect that to happen, and I was a little nervous. And what he said afterwards was, he hadn't lost a sibling, but he felt like he got to know his uncle, and that now he knows his uncle better. And it was like, I'd never even considered that was going to be an outcome of this. And it has made me really want to just share, so that, that generation knows him. And I think the strongest thing for me in continuing bonds, and I really do believe in that very much, is that I talk to him. For a lot of years, if there were moments where I wished I could call him or I wished I could text him, it would just send me into this spiral. And now if I feel like I want to call him or I feel like I want to text him, I just talk to him, and I just tell him the thing that I wanted to tell him. And I try to imagine what he would say. And I, have a little conversation with him in my head. And, it might sound something, but it works and it helps. And I think a lot of times I am able to kind of remember what, or come up with something convincing enough that he might say. And it's all of these little things to just keep his presence around us, and to, you know, keep, it's not even keeping his memory alive. It's kind of keeping his soul or his essence with us. And I have found it to be really, really comforting.
Same here. I think when my sister when my sister died, it was hard for me to write. It was hard for me to talk to her, even though in my mind I knew it would be good for me. Um, and then it changed. And as we're talking about how things can change as time goes, that changed. And for me, and I loved learning about continuing bonds, because I think the more you learn about grief, the more it gives you that permission, and that validation. Because I think even when people are like, "Am I doing this wrong?" and I'm always like, "No, absolutely not." And so I have her car. And so whenever I drive, there are times when I just simply imagine her in the passenger seat. And I have a conversation with her while I'm driving. Same themes. I am very privileged to have two kids, and one is named after her. And my wife actually made me a kids book that has pictures of her and her story that she gathered from other members of the family, and so I can read that book to them. And there's different ways. I also, one of my favorite things to do, that people like to hear me share sometimes, is that I take a trip. This year, like I said, this fifth year has been different for me, but every year I made it a point to take a solo trip with my sister. And so I would pick a weekend, or if I couldn't do a weekend, I would just go. I live in LA, so I would just go somewhere here in LA just for the day. And my wife would know it's your day, do whatever you want. And I would talk to her then. Um, and those are ways, but I also want to nurture her kids, because she has two kids that I want to help them continue the bonds too. So even helping them understand their own rituals, because when they were kids, they used to bake their mom brownies for her birthday. So some years, and as they've gotten into their 20s, I've been like, I will DoorDash them brownie mix, to just be like, whether they make it or not, just like little reminders to like, hey, make some brownies for your mom. And encourage them to have different ways that they can still engage, because it's been really fascinating, especially now becoming a mom myself. It's this new wave of grief that I'm experiencing, because I know she always wanted to be an aunt. And she was a single mom for a long time. So now I'm just like, how in the heck did you do this? And I want to ask her all these questions. And so being able to continue bonds in that way, in appreciating her and in recognizing like, man, like I didn't do you enough justice and help you out enough. And because the struggle was probably real. And yeah, and so I think that's a different type of grief as you continue to grow older. So yeah, just continuing that conversation and continuing ways. Some people were mentioning signs. I like to evoke signs. Like sometimes I'll be like, hey, I want this to happen. Or I want this. And I try to manifest my signs, but also giving myself the grace that if it doesn't happen, it's okay. But when it does, like I accept it. I accept it. So those are ways too.
I don't know if I missed anybody. Judy, did you have a chance to?
Yeah, no, as I've said, it's through my children and my grandchildren, and I have pictures around the house that I look at every day. And when I'm on the ice, I really feel them with me, and keeping their memories alive, and the fundraiser that their friends come, and being able now to actually talk about them and really make them present in my life.
Beautiful. So we are at the end here. I would like to share that in continuing bonds is where I found my hope and healing with the loss of my brother. I talk to him all the time. I am unapologetic about that. These events and having the space to share about him is how I get to be his sister now. And I do that very proudly and loudly. You don't have to be loud about it. It could be very quiet to your heart. That's also okay. All of it is so very, very valid. And I want to acknowledge one thing that seems very important here, that a lot of people had strained relationships with their siblings. So a lot of this lovey-dovey language doesn't necessarily resonate with them. You can leverage continued bonds, or like use continued bonds to heal that relationship after they are gone as well. Our imaginations are powerful. Our imagination is very powerful, excuse me. And we can use it to our advantage, to our healing. Sometimes we can write letters of the apologies that we never received. What do you wish you would have heard your sibling say? What unanswered questions do you still live with that maybe they can answer through your imagination? And whether or not it's real is a lot less important than how is it helping you heal and how is it helping you move forward. So focus on that. We get in our heads about, was that sign real? Is that really him or her? Or is that's irrelevant? Did it make you feel a moment of joy and connection? Did it help you heal? If the answer is yes, that's good enough. And so we want to leave it here with these beautiful messages. Thank you to each of our panelists. This was very powerful, very beautiful to acknowledge sibling loss that so many of us, especially early in our grief, felt so incredibly alone. And here I am seeing literally hundreds of messages being shared about me too, my sibling did too, and so many people relating. So let this be a reminder that you are not alone. And I thank you so much for showing up for yourselves and each other. And Andy, I hand it over to you so we could conclude. I feel like we could go on forever, but we'll stop here.
If you haven't already, please show some love for Nina Rodriguez,
Oh, thank you.
Annie Orenstein, Dr. Julie Shaw, Judy Lipson, and Moira Khan. This was a phenomenal, transformative event. So thank you. And I really loved how everyone in the chat were chiming into each other and supporting each other. If you want to ask more questions of our speakers, there are ways to contact them. We'll be sending out a follow-up email with their websites, with their socials. You can certainly get in touch with them that way. I want to thank you in advance. Nicole is going to be pasting in the chat a link for our survey. It's really, really important for us to get feedback from you. We want to hear what worked well, what could be improved. And Nicole will also be sharing in the chat a link to make a donation. Once again, thanks to all of you who have made a donation already. We're really grateful for that. Please join us for the remaining events, the two remaining events in our series, Surviving a Sibling. Eileen Kilty is here with us. She is leading a movement workshop for us next Wednesday, so please register for that. And our third session with fabulous writers. So that's it for now, and I hope to see a lot of you next Wednesday. And I hope you have a good rest of your week. Take good care, everyone. Thank you.